Sleep is one of the biggest concerns many people have when it comes to bringing a little baby home. And today we thought we would talk to you about swaddling babies and sleeping bags, and who better than our amazing Mothercraft nurse, Chris Minogue. So first of all, I wanted to, ask you, why do we swaddle babies?
So we swaddle babies because predominantly when they're born, they have a startle reflex, and this startle reflex is like a big shudder in their body, and it occurs about every 20 minutes. In the newborn, you see it quite predominantly, and as they mature, you see it less and less. And what swaddling does is it calms and quietens that movement, and in terms of their sleep, it allows them to sleep through that big startle movement that they do. So swaddling calms and quietens a baby.
And I think that's so important because when they do come home, they sleep a lot, don't they, in the early weeks?
They sleep. It doesn't feel like it, but they do. They sleep up to somewhere between 15 and 17 hours in 24 hours. So they're really in that feed sleep cycle until they mature and they get to about 3 months, and then there's more awake time probably than there is sleep time in their day.
One of the biggest things I've certainly learnt from you is about spending that time to understand your baby's rhythm. And I know that a lot of people talk about the first 40 days, and we talk about, now more than ever, just being at home with that baby, understanding their cues. I wanted to, ask you that very question. When we are swaddling our little ones, is it that we are using that as a sign or a cue that it is time for sleep?
Yeah, generally, there needs to be cues in order to learn to sleep, and so swaddling becomes the first of those because we want our babies to quieten and calm down in that very sort of early stages of learned sleep, and then it becomes a cue, so they might be swaddled and then cuddled and then put down.
I guess babies don't stay the same forever. They do change very frequently, so like their awake times and like their sleeping environment. I'd love to ask, how does that change? So in the early days, are we keeping them nice and snug with their arms in, and then when do we change them or transition them?
Well, that depends on the baby. It doesn't depend on a certain age. It depends on what your baby's doing. So swaddling in the early days is to calm them and quieten them, and as they develop, they'll at some stage start to move about and do part rolls and full rolls, and as they start to roll with consistency, then it's time that they need their arms free to be able to push up and to move themselves about. So we often do transitions through those, first 6 months of their life where they're swaddled, and then maybe their arms come out one and then the other, and then they have to readjust their sleep pattern to be able to have arms free. And at that stage, they usually move from swaddles into sleeping bags where they're sort of carrying their blanket around with them as they move around to bed.
And that's what I love. I know that, we do talk a lot, you and I, about the ergoPouch sleeping bags and swaddle bags. So I think having the benefit, because I know that rolling stage does sneak up on you very quickly. I remember with my firstborn, it's like, oh, hang on a minute, we've got a roller.
Yeah, that's
right. So I think having something that you can, then release the arm.
Yeah, that's right.
And do we do that over a certain period of time? It's not just overnight we're freeing them?
Well, some babies it is overnight that you're freeing them because they literally were not rolling yesterday, and today they're rolling all down the hallway.
Wow. Yeah.
So you would have to release it. So others, the rolling stage is much slower. They might only roll, and then a week later they roll twice. So the parents then can take a bit more time and release one arm, and then wait a few days and then release the other arm.
Great.
So I think that really depends on the baby, and it commonly occurs between 4 and 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So commonly around that period is when you start to see this development of the movement of the baby.
And I guess with any sleeping aids or sleeping supports, that when we are putting our baby down for sleep, that we are also taking consideration of the environment and giving them those cues and those signs. But there are some other things I know that I've certainly noticed recently with the change of weather. My little one started waking up a little bit earlier than usual, and I went, okay, time to increase the TOG rating with the sleeping bags. So
well, lots of people get confused with the TOGs and often actually overheat the baby. They think they need more, but I think if you can use it as a sense of like when you go to bed and you have blankets. So in the summer you only might have a sheet on, And so you need a much lighter TOG rating in the baby's swaddle or sleeping bag. And as the months go on and it gets cooler and we put doonas on, that's sort of what we're doing to the baby. We're putting a doona on and that's all got a rating, and we have a generic TOG rating. So they come in, 0.2, 0.5, 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. And that's really talking about the thickness. But I think we do have to be careful, because I think people think that we need a really, heavy TOG. So taking into consideration of the room is things like, do you have central heating? Do you have air conditioning? Do you only have a small heater in the room? And how does your house function? So, is it a particularly cold house, or actually does it retain warmth? Yeah. So it could be winter and you may not need that heavy TOG. And so I usually suggest parents to use themselves as a guide. So if you're in bed and you only had a light blanket on and suddenly you're undoing the doona, then maybe reconsider, that type of weight that you're putting your baby to sleep in terms of the TOG. Because their clothing is generally always the same. It's usually a singlet in the winter and then a long sleeve onesie, and in the summer it might be a short sleeve onesie. Yeah. So what you put them in terms of their swaddle and their sleeping bag is predicted by the environment around them, and there's no set rule. So I think you have to be careful with that, because it's got to do with how your house functions.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I know that my second born was up next to me in the room for the first 5 months, went downstairs. It's a lot colder near that front door.
That's right.
So it was having to completely reassess the environment.
That's right. And this time where it's autumn, you could have a nice, beautiful sunny day, and then you can have a much cooler afternoon and evening, so you might need to use 2 different versions of that TOG across this point until we get right into the winter months.
Very, very important to remember.
Yeah.
And finally, I guess when we talk about sleep, because again, we're talking about sleeping aids and sleep, it is an exciting time when you bring your little one home, but they do develop and change so quickly. So I always love Chris's insights when it comes to understanding those babies' needs. And I love what you say about just tune into them and observe and spend the time to stare at that beautiful little baby, because it goes very, very fast.
It does go very fast.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Oh, it's a pleasure.